All right, we're here with the XFL insider, the Adam Schefter, and though it makes him uncomfortable, of XFL News, Mr. Mike Mitchell. I appreciate you coming on the program today. How's it going?
I'm doing well, Mark. Thank you very much for having me on.
All right, so let's get right into it. So you had finally everything that you've talked about for the past couple months, the cities, the coaches, even some of the behind the scenes coaches are finally all laid out there. What did you think of the XFL's presentation, Danny and The Rock, with all this information coming out?
I think it was great the way they rolled everything out. It was pretty amazing, the reaction they got from the live crowd in Arlington. I think they were surprised by how excited people were. It's been a couple of years since they've been in that market, the XFL, even though this is new ownership. So they didn't know how people would respond. So it was a great turnout. And I think they did a very good job. You know, it could have gone a little bit sideways because they're releasing the names of the cities without actually releasing the team names, which there could have been some blowback for that. Like, who are we going to be called here? And so, but I think it was a very good job. There was a nice build up and lead up to it. And we saw with ESPN, with Sports Center, with them interviewing the coaches and the promotion there and all the showcases and the Deion Sanders stuff, and then the ESPYs, and then of course Jimmy Kimmel. So there was a nice build up to that reveal, and I think that it'll build up slowly. These are baby steps, really, because there's going to be full on promotion as we get closer, and so and then as team names come and all that, and then this TV schedule and the broadcast teams are going to be announced as well, and all that. Team schedules. I think it's going to pick up as we go along, and of course, when they add players to the league, it's a good start for them. I know there's a lot of people out there that have been impatient and that they've been waiting for something of significance to come by, and we've been getting dribs and drabs as we go along. But we're on that road now, and it's great to see.
Now, the girl, the woman who was like the MC, she's an ESPN person. And I remember in the beginning, she mentioned something about like how in the ESPN is with the XFL. Now, one of the first in things that there's been kind of rumblings about is the XFL draft. Have you heard that it might appear on ESPN?
I'm hearing it's definitely going to be with their media partners on ESPN. I don't know if it's going to be on ESPN Plus. I don't know the length of it because, mind you, we saw this a few years ago with the XFL when they had their draft. It's a long one. It could be 50, 60 rounds. So I don't know if all of that's going to be broadcast on there. I don't know if there'll be a specific portion for quarterbacks, or I do know that there will be positional drafts. It appears that way. So from everything I'm hearing, and Laura Rutledge did a terrific job there for ESPN. And I expect, I just recently saw, so I have to look into this. Brock Osweiler has just joined the ESPN broadcast team. He's a new guy to the fold there. And we saw that with the XFL in 2020. A lot of these people who work the games have basically been elevated ever since. So Kevin Burkhardt's the number one guy on Fox there with Greg Olson. They did XFL games. You saw Steve Levy and others move on to Monday Night Football and all that. So I think we're going to see Laura Rutledge and other people in ESPN involved. And that's great. It lends credibility to the league. You'll see Sports Center segments and all that. And from what I've heard, I fully expect the draft to be on ESPN. Now, even Doug Whaley and Russ Giglio were on a Zoom with agents and media members earlier this week or last week as when this airs. And they basically mentioned that their draft, they're waiting for their media partners to set a date and time, which is a clear tip off that it's going to be on ESPN. Just a matter of where it's going to be, whether it be an ESPN2 or an ESPN Plus. Now, remember, in the press release for the 5-year deal with Disney, they talked about tentpole events. So tentpole events points to a draft. So no question about it. That's a tentpole event for any football league, any league, period. So I think we're going to definitely see that. And it's going to be an exciting thing to see how they do it, how they present it. We could get uniforms at that time, too, with certain players that are selected. So that could be a nice little tie in there as well.
So one of the things that you had talked about was one of the first coach to jump ship from the USFL to the XFL, and that would be Chris Dishman, because we saw pictures of him at an XFL event. Yet in the press release, he still wasn't mentioned as the defensive coordinator for Hines Ward's San Antonio. Is that right?
Yeah, that is. No, he is joining Las Vegas with Rod Woodson.
Rod Woodson. Okay. I knew it was the Steelers guy.
As it turned out, Las Vegas right now is like a to be announced team, because if you look at it, their offensive coordinator is to be announced, their defensive coordinator is to be announced, their stadium is to be announced. Yeah. So it's kind of a fascinating setup going on right now. I don't know the logistics and what's going on contractually with Chris Dishman. I have known for a long time that was going to, while I was covering the New Jersey Generals for USFLnewshub.com, that he was going to be leaving the Generals to join Rod Woodson in the XFL with Las Vegas. We've also had, it's funny enough, the Las Vegas team, their director of player personnel is Joey Clinkscales, and he was working for the Tampa Bay Bandits. So he left the USFL also to join the XFL, and he was previously the Los Angeles Wildcats director of player personnel back in the XFL in 2020. So there's going to be a little bit of that. Two prominent USFL people, part of Rod Woodson's Las Vegas staff. The league itself did not want to announce Rod Woodson out of fairness to him, and they didn't.
You're talking about Chris Dishman?
Yeah, exactly. Chris Dishman. The XFL itself did not want to announce Chris Dishman's hire while the USFL season was going on, and nor did the coach want to make that announcement while he's coaching players in another league. So I don't know why the league, I don't know what technicalities are going on. I don't know if they're waiting on that for certain paperwork or what have you. I don't know exactly. But Chris Dishman for a long time now has agreed to join. Just a question of them officially announcing it. Dwayne Taylor is supposed to be the offensive coordinator for Rod Woodson. He's currently working at Alabama A&M. He's one of the best on that level. He's one of the best offensive coordinators in the nation. And coincidentally, he coached Akil Glass, player who just recently worked out for the XFL at the showcase in Jackson. So you can kind of connect the dots there, and you wonder if Akil Glass is going to be part of the Las Vegas franchise there. So in Las Vegas, very unique setup right now. No offensive coordinator named. And no defensive coordinator named at the moment, and no stadium. We'll get to that sooner or later. My expectation is that Allegiant Stadium will be the host of the Las Vegas XFL franchise. Sooner or later, that's going to be announced.
Interesting. So one of the things you talked about in our Anthony Miller covered that for us at XFL News Hub, this player contract thing. And then we had Mark Cast and all the guys from XFL News Hub were out there. And something about Rod Woodson had said, or something that given the impression that the XFL players are not going to be locked into their contracts. Have you heard anything about that? They're basically and they're basically letting them roam free. Like you play one season and you can go play with the USFL if you wanted to.
I'm working on that right now. I don't know if they're going to have that set up, in terms of allowing them to go to the CFL or USFL or what have you. If you're an XFL player and you're making more in the XFL than you are in the USFL, I don't know why you would want to go to another league and make less money. Yeah. So that's, it's always possible, but maybe you have a particular coach you like or something like that. But the pay is not significantly more in terms of the average player. Now, I do know that the non-quarterbacks, the top end quarterbacks that the league does sign and assign to their teams are going to be making six figures and above, similar to the XFL in 2020, where we had two quarterbacks who actually made close to $1 million. And there were three others that made over $500,000.
Do you know who those quarterbacks were?
I do. Now, this is why it's a crapshoot. I'll tell you. This is why it's a crapshoot sometimes. You think you're adding, quality veterans, and they just don't pan out. So the two highest paid quarterbacks in the XFL in 2020 were Landry Jones and Matt Mcgloin.
Oh boy, there you go.
And so Landry got hurt. He had a couple of nice games, but he didn't live up to expectations there. He had a nice game against LA where he threw for over 300 yards and all that, but it was kind of a disappointment there. But you can understand why Landry ended up with Bob Stoops. After all, Stoops coached him in Oklahoma. So yeah, and Jones had a very good college career. So anyhow, Mcgloin unfortunately didn't work out. He was a recommendation by Trip McCracken, who at the time was the personnel guy for the Guardians. He worked with the Kansas City Chiefs, John Peterson, I believe, too. And Andy Reid recommended Matt Mcgloin to Kevin Gilbride and the Guardians. And it seemed at the time, let's get a good veteran backup Northeast guy. You've respected. He'll do a good job, teaching these younger guys how to be a professional, go through meetings, game film, all that. Unfortunately, it didn't work out for Mcgloin there. Now, some of the other quarterbacks, Josh Johnson, PJ Walker, these guys are paid well. I don't know the exact specifics of their contract, but they were paid well into six figures. And the reason why it was done as well was to prevent them from jumping ship to the NFL because those two players had standing offers to join NFL rosters. The Steelers were hot and heavy on PJ Walker.
Really?
And during, if people remember this, in 2019, the Lions had injuries at their quarterback position and tried to sign Josh Johnson, but because of the XFL contract not allowing their assigned quarterbacks, top tier quarterbacks, to go to the NFL until the XFL season is over, Josh couldn't join. Josh is still in the NFL now, backing up Russell Wilson in Denver. So he did a tremendous job for the Jets and the Ravens last year, throwing for over 300 yards in each appearance. So I'm happy for him. Quality quarterback. It goes to show you. Even in the AAF, they had Johnson as the first overall pick in their draft. So you're going to see quarterbacks like that. It may seem crazy to some people to pay a quarterback $500,000, $600,000 and all that, but you're competing against, the possibility of not only these players latching on with NFL teams, but also on practice squads. Even practice squad salaries have gone up. So a player would rather make less and be in a practice squad with the hope that they'll get into an NFL game and get onto an NFL roster than try out a secondary league. So sometimes you have to sweeten the pot for certain players. It won't be for every one of them. I don't think the Russ Giglio and Doug Willie and all these guys want to overpay for quarterbacks. But if a certain one comes up that they feel could be a difference maker, it would not shock me if someone gets close to $1 million. That's the difference between the USFL and the XFL. Unless they change and I know Fox has funding and they're trying to raise funding up to 200 million. Unless the USFL decides to go that route and compete directly for those type of quarterbacks and pay six figures and all that, the XFL is going to have an edge in that range. And then the non-quarterback is going to be making $59,000. Now that's an average because there's some players are going to make more. On average, the players are going to make that, but some players are going to make more depending on how much they win. And then obviously the six-figure quarterbacks, if they win bonuses and everything else, will make more than what their contract says initially.
So have you heard any names that might be out there that the XFL might look at as far as quarterbacks in the future? I mean, I assume Landry, we saw Cardell Jones appear in the last Texas player thing. Maybe, the whole Sonic 2 has kind of changed. It came out, it kind of broke the curse. All you insiders, XFL people know what I'm talking about. Is he on the table? Is
I would say
Landry Jones on the table, or
right? We're in August now when this airs. So I'll say pay attention to NFL rosters right now because all those quarterback battles, the guys are the third, fourth, fifth guy on the depth chart. Because the last time the XFL ran in 2019 when they were getting ready for their draft, the players they ended up signing, their best players were all on NFL rosters in the summer of 2019. They ended up, that's the Jordan Teamos, the PJ Walkers, the Cam Phillips, the Donald Parhams, etc., James Butler, etc., etc., etc. So right now, if you look at NFL rosters, if you go to ourlads.com or go to whatever site you go to and you check out the depth charts and you start looking at those quarterbacks, I would say, even though he just signed, I would look out for a guy like Josh Rosen. If he somehow does not land on a practice squad or a roster, he'd be somebody who's definitely a target, the XFL. One player that I know is a target, and perhaps by the time I say this, he ends up on an NFL roster, is Garrett Gilbert. So Garrett Gilbert was recently released by the Raiders. They've had a lot of different transactions on the back end of their roster at quarterback, and Gilbert obviously was a star in the AAF, and he's been in the NFL ever since. There was a sequence last year with Washington where on the same roster was Taylor Heineke, Garrett Gilbert, and Jordan Teamo. When the Commanders were getting ready to play, it's pretty hilarious. All those spring league quarterbacks on the same roster at the same time. And Gilbert started and did pretty well. He has ties to Russ Giglio, who's in the XFL right now, one of the top personnel guys in the XFL. And Giglio is responsible for signing him. So I think players like Garrett Gilbert, who have direct ties to the personnel department in the XFL, are going to be the types of players and quarterbacks that XFL 3.0 signs and assigns to their teams.
And so what was your thoughts on the USFL season as it came to a close, kind of overall? I mean, because there's a lot of guys we keep seeing now, a lot of these USFL guys are getting signed. Mike, I'm curious if these guys did sign that, that option for the second year, because now they have to get released from their contracts so that they can try out in the USFL. And now do you see, I mean, I guess first off, what did you think of the USFL season and these guys moving on to the NFL?
It affirms my belief. It confirms my belief in that spring football has validity and it's valuable and it's important. And so So, the AAF was over 40 plus guys who signed on with the NFL when that league ended. And then the XFL was 57. And there's over 24 XFL players currently on NFL rosters. So to see now the number keeps growing as I'm speaking, I think it's like 25 now. So it's tremendous. So it just, validates anybody who is an advocate for these leagues that there's talent out there. And I thought the USFL, as far as their season goes, it was quality football. It got better as the season went along. I was happy for the league and the players and the coaches that were involved, and I think they did a good job. There are things you can nitpick overall in terms of their football structure, in terms of their business structure and all that, but they completed a season. They're headed to a year 2, which is awesome. Teams are in off-season mode right now, adding players to their off-season roster, which is going to be 75. They'll go back to 40 plus 10 in the regular season next year, but that's nice to see. There'll be a draft at the beginning of 2023, much smaller, obviously, than the crazy draft that we had a few months back. So I was impressed with the USFL. I'm happy the way it came off. Like I said, there were certain aspects that maybe I thought, left a lot to be desired, but overall, the existence of this type of league is tremendous for the football landscape. So, and it's pretty crazy that we're heading into a world now where the XFL and USFL, 2 separate prominent spring pro football leagues, are going to be existing in the same space. It's pretty awesome.
And now you have these guys. I mean, now it gives us, I remember when we were excited when the XFL players made it to rosters and we go, we can watch. Well, they didn't even know if the NFL had a preseason at that point because it was, what was going on. Now we have these USFL players. Is the thinking that these guys are going to stick with the practice squad? Or do you think like a lot of these 25 guys that maybe, a bunch of them will get cut and then they're technically free agents? Do you think they might make their way to the XFL?
It's kind of a gray area there because initially a lot of the USFL players that signed the initial contract during draft time, there was an option clause in there, but there were some players and agencies that decided not to opt in. So you had an option. The USFL amended their contract as the season went along to create a clause where you had to, in order to sign a contract, you automatically were opting in. So that's a gray area. I don't know for sure how many of these players that are on NFL rosters now that just played in the USFL, how many of them are going to be free to go to the XFL. That's a mystery right now, something I don't know. In terms of the USFL players being on NFL rosters and making it, there are some things in their favor, especially if you're a special team standout like Avante Turpin, who I covered this past season at USFLnews.com. I think he's got a very good chance to be a star on special teams and to contribute on offense. So I that's great for the league. If you're turning on NFL games and this guy's making big plays, which I think he's going to, it's going to basically, that's a selling point for the entire USFL. It's a selling point to players, agents come play in our league. Look what happened. And now with the practice squads expanded, with the flexibility that NFL rosters have, I think that's going to help guys stick onto rosters. If it's not the 53, then on the practice squad.
Now you talk to a lot of agents, speaking of these contracts. So now you had the XFL contract out, the USFL contract. What's the kind of sense that you're getting from players and agents when it comes to the 2 leagues?
There's a lot of agents that prefer the XFL because of the calendar, because their season ends in April and May, and it gives players not only more time to latch on to NFL teams, but it also gives players an opportunity to recover physically. Now, we'll see what happens with some of the USFL players that are in NFL camps now. But when you play a full 10, 12-week season, and then you go directly into an NFL training camp and try to play the season, it's not impossible for these superb athletes to do that, but it makes it much more difficult. You don't have recovery time. So, and also, you have an opportunity because this point of the year, we'll see with the USFL, the more the merrier. Hopefully 40, 50, 60 guys get signed. You never know. But we'll see if they're able to get in that 50 range, 57 range. They may not. Camps have just started. We'll see. There'll be injuries and all that. But a lot of the agents I spoke to prefer the pay in the XFL. They like the fact that a lot of these players are playing in states where they're tax friendly. So that helps with the players. They get more of their money back. They like the setup of the XFL, the ownership and all that. So there's, the XFL still has to go out and prove themselves, the product and all that. But a lot of agents are very bullish on the XFL. They're valued, the timing of the calendar, who's involved, the money, all that, all those things are, a factor. The USFL is a viable option too in all of this now. So I'm not saying that they're not, but from the agents that I've spoken to, they're leaning a little bit more towards the XFL side.
Now, as far as the XFL goes, have you heard anything about TV shows? Or I mean, we heard Danny Garcia talk about this round the clock kind of content stuff. I know you were the one that's been really kind of talking about, actually, out of everything that you've talked about, the one thing that we have yet to see, which clearly we wouldn't see right this second, is this kind of some kind of XFL TV show. Have you been hearing anything, a buzz about anything of that stuff going on?
A big part of all this, and I will say this, I have, they mentioned this during the Arlington press conference on Monday, how everything is set up in Arlington is also going to involve $7 and the Garcia companies involved, the production. We know they've been filming stuff all along here. We've seen that, some of the reels and all that. We know Jay Rothman, who for many years worked college football, Monday Night Football, is basically the head of video production and production with the XFL. They also talked about a content creation center and all that. And then we've also heard about tentpole events and all that. So it remains to be seen. We're going to get a lot of content. We're going to get a lot of behind the scenes content with players, coaches, all that. Remains to be seen whether it be a traditional documentary, although a lot of stuff's been filmed. I think we're going to get a lot of behind the scenes stuff for each individual team. The question is, how will it be formatted? How will it be set up? And, the big thing with somebody like Dwayne Johnson and Danny Garcia doing, you'll see them in all these things, by the way, the behind the scenes stuff, the documentary stuff, but essentially focusing on Dwayne every single show, as him as the main character. It's a reality show, but as the main character you follow, that's a little bit difficult with Dwayne Johnson's schedule. I'm not saying that won't happen. That's definitely been discussed. But they've already given hints this past week about amping up the content creation 24 hours a day, basically, players connecting with fans and video stuff and all this content that they're going to be putting out on their social media, websites. And it stands to reason if they have any behind the scenes stuff that it'll be with their partners through Disney, which is Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, most likely. So it's going to be interesting. We haven't heard a big announcement in terms of a documentary show, but they've already hinted that there's going to be a lot of content that's going to be behind the scenes related.
And so, with fans being as fickle as they are, cool, the cities are announced, whatever's announced. Well, when are the team names? When are the team names? So what are you hearing as far as team names goes? That's probably the number one question you get asked.
You've mentioned it for so long on xflnewshub.com that you weren't expecting anything until August. So here we are, right? Yep. So I think we're going to get something in this month in terms of the team names and the logos and the colors and all that.
This month, August.
That's what I think, so, okay. I mean, it's possible. Maybe so I think we're going to get something on that. In terms of uniforms and all that, I'm not so sure. But, in terms of if that will be along with the package, but we'll see. But they've been working on it for a long time. I mean, they closed up XFL Shop and the team merchandise for several months now. And so my expectation from everything that I've heard, and perhaps there's some changes here and there, but that the 5 returning cities will all have their same names. Now, whether or not they'll have the same logos and some tweaks here and there based on legalities and copyright stuff, the issues that they had from the previous league, that remains to be seen. But I do think we're going to see, and I'm hopeful of this, obviously, the Battlehawks, the Defenders, and all those other great teams, the Renegades, the Roughnecks, and of course, the Dragons.
All my merch.
So there we go. I mean, why would you want to abandon that? I know that the Redbird and everybody got an excellent deal in the XFL. They bought it for only $15 million. It ended up being whatever, 20 plus million, whatever, when they had to deal with a whole bunch of other stuff in terms of the cost of purchasing it. But you have awesome brands already in place, like that DC Defender shield you have there, like the Battlehawk. So I could see some alterations and tweaks to the uniforms, and maybe some alterations and tweaks in terms of the overall look of the logo, maybe a little bit changes here and there, but I expect those names to be back. The fun stuff is, and that's fun in and of itself, but the fun stuff is finding out what San Antonio is called, what Las Vegas is called, what Orlando is called. And so that is going to be the most interesting of all the elements. It's going to be fascinating. Once they do that, once you have actual identities attached, I think you can really start to move forward in terms of selling merchandise, another stream of revenue and all that, but also in getting these markets attached to you. If it's the Las Vegas Diamonds or the whatever San Antonio Scorpions, you know, all this
Uh-huh.
kind of stuff. It's much easier to attach yourself to that than XFL San Antonio. So it'll be interesting, fascinating to see.
And it's so scheduled. You think that in like that rule book, all that's going to follow the same timeline as the other iteration, that stuff is not going to come for a while, or you?
I think you know, I don't know. I don't have a definitive date. I wish I did on that. I think there was a mention this week of the rules being completed, whether or not they roll that out. Danny Garcia, I think, mentioned that on the Markcast, that the rules are done, that they had league meetings last Saturday about it. So Russ Giglio and Dean Blandino and those guys they're definitely going to be, you know, they're definitely going to roll that out in pretty soon. I would say. I would say within the next month or so, I will hear about that as well. The interesting thing about rules, that I think about it, I don't want to belabor this point too much, but you know, obviously the USFL used a lot of the XFL rules. They had the same XFL draft, the positional draft. They did a lot of that stuff, the overtime, the point conversions, all that. You know, the XFL might come up with some interesting and unique rules that we haven't thought of yet. And then you just wonder, can't really copyright rules if the USFL goes, oh, I like that, I'll take that.
Yeah,
So
true.
how secretive do you want to be with certain things that you want to put out there for the public? But Russ Brandon also mentioned that they would be releasing the rules and explaining them. And I'm sure there'll be a big presentation by Dean Blandino to kind of break down all the rules, kind of like what we had in the XFL in 2020 when they had all the videos on YouTube and all that stuff on their social media that explained everything. So that's going to be fun too, to see how much they retain. Now, because they're testing rules for the NFL, which is part of their collaboration with the NFL, I do expect them to have the cream of the crop in terms of NFL suggestions, things the NFL wants to try but can't, and that the XFL is going to try. So there's a little bit of a collaboration there. So how much of XFL 2020 do we get? How much of the NFL's desired rules for their future do we get? And then, of course, I think the league is mostly going to be NFL-based rules, but there'll be certain things here and there.
So last two questions. One, I know that they were mentioned that the XFL scouts would be at NFL camps. Were they that way in 2020? Were there XFL scouts at those camps also?
There was.
Okay.
And there was. Matter of fact, Cardell Jones was somebody that was like scouted by Norm Chow and others, and Pep Hamilton. So, and right now I saw AJ Smith, who's Houston's offensive coordinator under Wade Phillips, who was also with Houston 2 years ago. He's recently at the Chargers camp, looking at players there. So, you know, that, Doug Whaley mentioned it as well, that all the XFL personnel people are going to be at NFL camps. It's a fun time if you're a fan of the XFL or USFL. These preseason games have a lot more importance than they normally do for these. Yeah, so am I. I mean, I can't wait. You know, just as a CFL guy and an NFL guy too, and as a Jets guy, I'm anxious to see Chris Streveler play in the preseason for the Jets. He's such a character. So I'll see what happens with him. But beyond that, from an XFL standpoint, USFL standpoint, a lot of these players that you see in that final preseason game and during the preseason games are going to be in the XFL. A large portion, I mean, the XFL worked out 1,300 players, showcases, thereabouts, maybe a little bit more than that. And a good portion of those guys will be in the league, no question about it. They find some gems, some diamonds in the rough, no question. But a large portion of the XFL rosters are going to come from the nearly 700 players that are cut in September by NFL teams. It's probably 654. They're about 670. Those are the amount of players that are not going to be on the 53 that did not make the practice squad either. So it's going to be close to 700 players. So you're fielding a league of 400 plus players, whatever the case may be. The XFL is going to have a good chunk of those guys that don't make NFL teams. And I think that's one quick thing I want to note. This draft has been pushed back to November for a specific reason, to give more time for cut players from the NFL to make the jump to the XFL, because what happens with a lot of these guys who get cut, who don't make practice squads in the 53, what they do is they wait on the sidelines for another NFL opportunity. A lot of agents will tell their players, wait till there's injuries, maybe you'll get back on, wait it out. But as a month and 2 months goes by, then you can kind of see whether or not there's an opening for you. And it helps you better decide whether you want to go to the XFL or not. If you see that you're not getting any interest in the NFL, workouts are dried up, you know what, I'm going to give the XFL a shot. So the XFL is also going to have drafts in December and in January, supplemental drafts right before camp starts. So they have a 5-week camp in January. So that's going to be fascinating. These players who I have great interest in and I followed closely and through college and everything else, watching them in the preseason. I'm a nut to begin with who loves preseason games. I'm going to love them even more this summer.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. Final question. Now that we have all these cities in place, are we going to get these team presidents to come back now that it's kind of like, okay, we're going to set up shop? I've seen things where there is going to be a local element to these teams. The players and coaches might not be here during the season, but there definitely be, boots on the ground in every city promoting the league. Are we going to see team presidents back in the fold?
I've been asking about that for quite some time now. In the early stages, I've been told that there wouldn't be, but you figure if you're going to do anything locally beyond because each team has 5 home games in their markets. So you figure beyond the 5 home games, you'd like to do things with the community. Now, I know with social media nowadays, you can connect with people much better than you could in the past. You don't necessarily have to do everything. You can connect with your markets through that, but it would be great if they did a little more, boots on the ground, so to speak, to sell tickets and all that. So we'll see where that goes, but I haven't heard anything about that yet.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we're here with XFL Insider, the GOAT. I saw somebody put your picture up there, and it was a goat.
I love it. I love it. I love
a
it.
real goat. But hey, Mike, I appreciate your time, and we'll be in touch as we get closer to kickoff.
Thank you so much, Mark, for having me on. These are exciting times for all of us who are fans of pro football.